Hello, good evening, and welcome everybody to Charlie Byrne's for this wonderful event. We are delighted to have any event at the moment, but this is a particularly touching event for us to do. An old friend of ours, Pete Mullineaux's new book, Jules Rom, Sci-Fi Meets Shakespeare, and we're delighted to be able to launch it here this evening. The format for our event will be our person to launch the book is Emily Cullen, who is another old friend of ours. Emily is a writer and poet based in Galway, and this is Emily's book, Conditional Perfect, launched around the corner down in the museum in only 2019, but in what seems like a world away from our recent experience. But Emily is going to launch the book, and then Pete will read a couple of pieces from the book to give you a flavor of it. And I think you'll agree that it will be a wonderful event in prospect. And I'll hand you over to Emily Cullen now to introduce the book.
Thanks so much, Vinny, for that lovely introduction. And Pete, thank you for the honour of launching your book. I'm delighted to be here. So before I tell you a bit about this wonderful book, I'm going to say a few words briefly about Pete himself. Pete is a Galway-based writer. Indeed, I've had the pleasure of knowing him on the Galway Arts Circuit since my days as arts officer at NUI Galway in the early noughties. And Pete has published 4 poetry collections, most recently How to Bake a Planet, and a new collection is forthcoming next year. His work has been described by various reviewers as profoundly sensitive, gorgeous and resonant, emotional and tender, witty and philosophical, and grimly funny, while comparisons have been made with Roger McGough, John Clare, John Cooper Clarke, and Pete Seeger. He's had 3 radio plays produced by RTÉ Radio, including the sci-fi drama Butterfly Wings, starring Owen Roe and Karen Ardif. And he's written a number of stage plays for youth theatre. Pete has been interviewed about his work on RTÉ's art and culture programme Arena, and both Poetry Ireland Review and Irish Music Magazine described him as a gem. And I can testify that he's both a gem and a gent. Oh. With a lot of street cred that people don't know about, he was also in a punk band back in the day, so he's got a lot of kudos there as well. Pete's day job is teaching global issues in schools through poetry and drama. Interdependence Day, Teaching the Sustainable Development Goals Through Drama for All Ages, was published in February by AFRI. And now I'm going to tell you a bit about Jules Rom, his debut novel. One of the things about writing about the future is that it's very easy to get it wrong, to write something that misses the mark, that doesn't stand the test of time, or comes off as a little bit implausible and unrealistic, in spite of a reader's willingness to suspend their disbelief. Pete Mullineaux's debut book, set in the year 2040, has a seamless continuity in its depictions of a society saturated with artificial intelligence. In other words, Pete has gotten it right. We witness gadgets such as eye specs and eye globes, honeycombs, holograms, tariffs for carbon indulgences, androids interspersed among the workforce as teachers, janitors, nurses, etc. And we also witness the ethical tensions around all of these issues, with groups such as People Before Androids protesting in force against robots replacing humans in their jobs. In short, this book is alive with ideas. And what comes across in particular is that Pete is writing about themes that are close to his heart, about theatre and William Shakespeare, about young people in education, about theatre as an educational tool, and of course, about AI. The book is really a natural development from Pete's poetry and his playwriting. And in terms of theme, from his work in schools, exploring global issues such as war, climate change, and threat to ecosystems. And when a writer is engaged with subjects close to his heart and is clearly enjoying himself, the reader senses it too, and that pleasure becomes infectious and is in turn internalized by the reader. Though this is Pete's first novel, it demonstrates that he's already a master storyteller because the narrative is beautifully paced and his prose is crisp and clear throughout. Now, as a reader myself, I don't tend to get around to reading half as much science fiction as I would like. Perhaps in a parallel universe, I'm getting through all those Ursula Le Guin and Neil Gaiman books on my perennial reading list. And so, as a somewhat unseasoned science fiction reader, I can attest to the fact that I found this book very accessible, thoroughly thought-provoking, and highly enjoyable. Jules Rom poses many fascinating questions, and without giving too much away, these include: what happens if an android teacher is taunted by his students and ends up having a meltdown in the classroom? How might we go about repairing that damage? Other questions include: could android actors of the future convincingly act in a Shakespeare play, such as Romeo and Juliet? Could their emotional intelligence and empathy be upgraded to give a natural, nuanced performance? Does AI have the capacity to be in the moment like human actors? And I suppose nearly most importantly, will androids of the future be universally hardwired, not to cause harm to a human being under any circumstances? One of Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, promulgated in his 1942 short story Runaround and published in his famous collection I, Robot. Pete skillfully plays with all of these hypotheses surrounding the implications of upgrading an android's EI while seeking to uphold Asimov's laws. There's also a highly suspicious death at Big Rock High School, a potential world-changing contract from the United Nations Security Council of the future for android peacekeepers, and a rebel ringleader with some menacing tricks up her sleeve, which amplify the tensions and keep the reader riveted. I won't give too much more away because you'll just have to purchase a copy of the book for yourself and find out how it all plays out. And indeed, it is the play, Romeo and Juliet, that is the key to the unfolding story here. One of the features of this book that I especially enjoyed was the centrality of art amid all the technology. Because we observe that it is the space of the theatre and not the global battlefield that becomes the final frontier as a testing ground for an android's emotional intelligence. The fact that technology is serving art and not vice versa is an aspect of this story that I especially enjoyed. And in many ways, it sustains a hopefulness throughout and keeps the story humanized. In fact, this book is in no way nihilistic, even amid some of its slightly more dystopian and cautionary elements around the future of our ecosystem, which perhaps we need to hear. Indeed, Jules Rom is full of insightful nuggets throughout, while wearing its wisdom lightly. There are gems of information about the importance of seed banks and how these vital lifelines are often mercilessly decimated during war times. There are pearls of theatrical wisdom from Bertolt Brecht and others, and there are some eye-opening perspectives about how decisions are made about technology in our age of techno-capitalism. But these layers of insights are never preachy or didactic. In fact, there's a lovely tone running through this book, often slightly wry, which allows for many moments of levity and colour. Jules Rom is a book for all readers, for adults and young adults, and for the latter especially, there's a clear value in a book such as this, which promotes independent critical thinking. So to conclude, it's remarkable to think that what is widely accepted as the first official science fiction novel, Frankenstein, was published by the 19-year-old Mary Shelley back in 1816. And of course, one of the questions arising from Frankenstein about the man-made creature is, will the artificial being have a soul? Science is now capable of things that Mary Shelley could only have imagined in her wildest dreams, and Jules Rom radically updates that question for our information age, while also posing many others, such as, at what stage do we cross the line between humanity and something else? At the heart of this book lies a gripping story that is as much about emotional intelligence and relationships as it is about AI, and I recommend Jules Rom unreservedly. In fact, I'm looking forward to rereading it again soon and pondering its questions further. So congratulations, Pete. Very well done.
Emily, thank you so much, Emily, for such, that was so wonderful. I was riveted.
I'm glad I did it justice, I hope.
Oh, no, thank you. That was great. I thank you so much. I'm a little bit speechless. Anyway, I'll just say thank you very much. And thank you to Vinny as well for opening us up and getting us going. And to Charlie Byrne's Bookshop for hosting my debut novel launch. It's a very special moment for me. And I should welcome everybody who's come in to join us, family and friends all over Ireland and the UK, in the US, in Germany, in France, and lots of other places. Say hello to everybody. Anyone else who's just happened to have dropped in, you're very welcome as well. And I want to thank a few people, of course. First of all, thank my publishers, Troubadour Publishing, who the whole team there have been so supportive, and have produced what I think is a beautiful book, a beautiful production. I want to thank Dave Hill, who did the gorgeous, the stunning cover, which I fell in love with as soon as I saw. I want to thank my partner Moya, my partner and long life friend, my comrade and co-conspirator, who's been with me and is a light in terms of sharing with me her wisdom and her ideas and her own creativity. I want to thank my daughter Cass, who without whom this book would not be here, who read early drafts and gave me really good, constructive, critical feedback, tore the thing to pieces, and then helped me put it back together again. Yeah, thank you, Cass. I want to thank Sean Crossan of NUIG, Houston Film School, who read an early draft and again met up with me, and we had a great session talking through the book and gave me great feedback. Jerry Hanbury, who's written a lovely piece for the back of the book. I also want to thank AFRI, Action from Ireland, Joe Murray, and all the people at AFRI, one of the groups that I work with in schools and worldwide global schools, looking at global issues, without whom I don't think this book would be here as well. And all the other, working with Poetry Ireland and working with all the young people and teachers in schools that I've worked with that have out of which this book, the ideas for this book came. So Emily told you quite a bit about the book, and I'm going to read just a couple of short pieces from it. As she said, we're in the year 2040. AI is everywhere. It's become a major issue, and we're in a US high school where many of the teachers are androids. The kids are all partnered with android learning buddies to help them through their assignments. But recently the kids have fallen out with their learning buddies because the school has downgraded the empathy software to make them work harder. So they're in kind of a rebellious mode. Into this comes Kerry Tracker, a young teacher who's been brought in to oversee a production of Romeo and Juliet, following the emotional meltdown of the android teacher, Mr. Milton, who was previously assigned to the task. And at some point in the story, a subplot develops around a suspicious death of one of the teachers, Rob Bennett, who is the teacher responsible for the android workforce in the school. And then that involves some kind of mysterious connection with the US military. Anyway, well, I'll jump in with this first piece. This is the point where Kerry first meets the group that she's going to be working with, the Romeo and Juliet drama group. And I've just taken my bookmark straight out and lost a page. So 1 second, sorry. Okay, here we are. Kerry was about to introduce herself when Rob Bennett stepped in through the entrance and addressed the kids. "Why aren't your learning buddies with you?" Kerry remembered the line of androids she just passed outside in the corridor, the sophisticated models the principal had talked about. "We left them out there till we know what's happening," replied Tanya Castro with a dismissive click of her tongue. "Maybe we don't need them today," said Stevie Marvin sourly. Rob frowned. "You know eye-specs aren't allowed during school activities." The group sighed as they made their specs transparent. "This is our lunch break," said Wanda Jones. "I understand from the principal the LBs are to be an essential part of this," said Rob. Kerry watched as he instructed the learning buddies to file in and line up over to one side. The kids immediately turned their backs on them. So these were the offenders against Mr. Milton. It was clear they were here only on sufferance. Her most immediate task was to win them over to the project, so they actually wanted to be here, not feeling like they'd been press ganged. Kerry offered a polite thank you to Rob as he retreated through the door. Then she turned to face the group. Hi, it's great to meet you all, and thank you for coming. Today will be a quick chat just to touch base before we get going properly. Anyway, I gathered from that revealing snippet of conversation with Mr. Bennett, you've already taken the initiative and divided yourselves up into Montagues and Capulets. The kids stared back at her. 2 tribes, she prompted. You mean those freaks over there? Chuck Harrington tilted his specs upwards so you could see his full face. They can't be in the play. I don't see why not, Kerry replied calmly. The group looked to one another, clearly not sure how to take the new teacher. You do know why they've been left out there in the cold, said Wanda. Geez, she knows nothing, snorted Harper. Didn't the principal tell you anything, said Chuck. Well, he told me you'd already started reading through the play. I know he's also very keen on involving the learning buddies, so I thought. Harper placed her hands on her hips. Okay, even if we did agree to do this, I was already reading Juliet. I'm not falling in love with a dumb android droid, Montague droid. Of course you're not, replied Miss Tracker. This is fiction, right? Acting. All eyes looked to the leader of the Brat Pack. Despite the girl's open hostility, she appeared to be caught in 2 minds, hovering on the brink of walking out, but at the same time curious to find out more. You've been brought in special to do this thing, asked Wanda. That's right, I'm taking over from where Mr. Milton left off. A chorus of guffaws went round the room like a spinning top. So Mr. Crazy Man Braid is depending on you to pull this off, said Stevie, shuffling around and rubbing his chin inquisitively, examining Kerry like an explorer discovering a new breed of exotic creature. And on you too, replied Kerry, as she looked again to Harper, who did appear to be wavering. You're actually thinking of using the droids like they're one of the 2 tribes, asked Omar. Does that mean we get to fight? Does that mean we get to act out the feud with them as the sworn enemy? Said Chuck, suddenly sounding keener. I'm sure we can explore that as a possible scenario, said Kerry, trying to ride disinterest while at the same time wary of overcommitting to one angle. We'll always have to be during lunch breaks, said Tanya. We have lives to lead. Okay, this might involve a little bit of hard work, but it might also turn out to be enjoyable and rewarding, said Kerry. What the hell? Let's go for it then, Harper said, finally, to looks of genuine surprise from the others. Is that the same for everyone? Asked Kerry. There was a collective shrug in response. Well, that's great, you're all on board. And thank you for your mature attitude. So can we begin with the full session tomorrow at the same time? The group offered a choral look which said, okay. So I'll see you then. Kerry threw them a last smile as she left. So what changed your tune? Asked Wanda as soon as the teacher had gone. Who said I've changed anything? Said Harper. Sure, it sounds like the dumbest thing ever. That's why we're going to do it and make sure the whole thing's a disaster. So Mr. Not So Funny Brady can come down on his big fat butt and bring his whole crap ass school with him. So that's the end of that bit. And we get a sense of what Kerry is up against with this group. Another central key character in the book is the school's android janitor, AJFX72, or AJ for short. And in this bit, he's talking to the principal, Jim Brady, following the meltdown of the Mr. Milton, the android teacher who was assigned to the Romeo and Juliet project originally. Brady found AJ carefully hoovering up the last scattered micro bits and pieces of Mr. Milton. The elongated extension hose whirred and whistled with a high-pitched screech. Brady grimaced at the sound, then flinched at the sight of what looked like an eyeball being sucked up. All of Mr. Milton parts have been recovered, Mr. Brady. The main sections were taken away earlier for inspection. A fine mess we got ourselves into, AJ said Brady. So what's your informed take on this? There was a marked delay while the android endeavored to pin down an appropriate response, finally offering something that suggested bemused detachment, although the words that followed were in a slightly forced voice tone. Mr. Milton was a diligent and hardworking teacher, Mr. Brady. However, the pupils were not fond of him, so I gather. So I gather. Is that empathy or irony I'm hearing, AJFX72? My own observations have led me to believe that all is not well between staff and students, said the android, now getting up to speed with the conversation. Brady did a double take. All is not well, period, he said. Let's hope it ends well, the android quipped, with a nimble shift of voice register and a stock smiley. Was that supposed to be a wisecrack? Asked Brady, raising both eyebrows. I didn't mean to cause offense, Mr. Brady. You yourself have the habit of throwing away such a line, said the janitor. Brady grinned. Anyway, your humor is much appreciated, AJ. A little comedy always lightens the load. But I don't know where half of that clever stuff comes from. Who knows what other mysteries are going on inside that old head? It was merely wordplay on the title of another Shakespeare play the students did at one time, said AJ. Remember, I have you personally to thank for permitting me access to all the Bard's texts. And why not, said Brady. No reason why an honest blue-collar guy can't have the same fanciful notions as anyone else around here. Rob Bennett gave a cough as he appeared in the doorway. Mr. Milton's gone into the pre-lab ready for transport back to company headquarters. I feel really bad about what happened. I just didn't see it coming. I was watching the monitor. The class looked like it was going really well. Okay, the kids were animated, but they were doing a play after all. I turned the volume down for a moment to tune into the other screens, and then I was called away to attend to an incident in the canteen. I caught it myself on flashback, said Brady. It all happened in a flash. Not good for the school's image, said Rob. Yes, a fine mess we got ourselves into, said Brady for a second time. After Jim Brady and Rob Bennett had excused themselves and left the room, AJ waited a moment or two for their footsteps to recede and then moved behind the command desk at which Mr. Milton had last addressed his wayward students. The android janitor looked down at the vacated space, then out at the empty hob. Finally, AJFX72 produced an expression that was neither a smile nor a frown, something different altogether. What's going on inside AJ's head becomes a key point of the whole part, so I won't tell you. You'll have to read it. So yes, a suspicious death does take place in the school. There's a post-mortem which says it was an accident, but there's still a lot of doubt hanging over it. And Special Agent Linton is brought in to pursue the investigation. And this final piece is where Linton has gone out to an eco farm outside the city to meet Rob Bennett's sister. Where the dirt track came out alongside a lake, Linton wondered if there were any real fish in there. Maybe these people knew how to keep them alive. Or was it just as polluted and full of plastic as much of the open water on the planet? Linton dwelt on the irony of how some of that plastic was now actually made into the shape of aquatic life, designed to fill lakes and pools with artificial movement and color, so things might not look quite so bad. Thanks for making the time to talk. I'm sorry for the loss of your brother. Linton looked across the wooden table at Rob Bennett's sister, dressed in a tie-dye vest and Aladdin-style pants. Her long hair was twisted into two beaded plaits, and she had a flower tattooed on each bare shoulder. Elizabeth returned him a bemused smile. Thank you, Detective. I appreciate your kind words, not to mention coming all the way out here to say them. Linton shifted his body weight on the hard wooden seat. I know you already talked to the police, but that was a formal interview, and I was hoping you might help in giving me a fuller picture of Rob. We didn't get a lot from his fellow teachers in terms of his personal life. He appeared to have kept much to himself. Elizabeth shrugged. Rob and I also led largely separate lives. I guess he was always busy with his own thing. But you'd say he was like a likable character, not someone who would encourage enemies. Linton framed it in the affirmative, like there was no real reason for doubt, yet knowing there was subtext for anyone who wanted to hear it. Elizabeth thought for a moment before replying. To answer the first part of your question, I'd say my brother was a likable guy. And you never thought to seek a fuller, more public inquest yourself? Elizabeth frowned. Why invite a cloud of suspicion? Wouldn't that imply he was involved in something that might have put him at risk? Sure, said Linton, backing off, not wanting to put her on the defensive, especially now she appeared to be opening up a little. He reached in his pocket and took out a photo. We were given this picture. Maybe you can identify where and when it was taken. Elizabeth looked sadly at the image for a few seconds, turned it over and then handed it back. Rob loved robots. I say that was at least 5 years ago at one of those DARPA conventions. DARPA, said Linton. That's the Department of the Military looking at new technology. Elizabeth shrugged. Those public conventions are open to anyone. They do like to show off their toys. Rob would have gone there a number of times. As if on cue, a squadron of military planes appeared overhead, flying low and making their presence felt with the loud roar of their engines. With Elizabeth withdrawing into herself for a moment, Linton took advantage of the break in the conversation to look around and absorb their surroundings. The rustic lodge next to where they were sitting, the nearby gardens and polytunnels, orchards extending into the distance. He took in the stillness of the place, the kind of peace you'd want to protect. Regarding his interviewee, he was conscious of how in revealing anything about herself, she was potentially offering valuable insight into her brother's character. If Elizabeth was a peace lover and she expressed a kinship with Rob, it might back up the image of him being a kind, peaceful kind of a guy. At the same time, it couldn't be ignored how she was an eco-warrior, an activist with a conscious motivation for her actions, and maybe a broader agenda. Maybe there'd been more to Rob Bennett than the quiet, unobtrusive person everyone seemed to remember. Elizabeth looked up at the sun overhead like someone else would look at the wristband for the time. I'm afraid I'll have to stop now. Several things to be done before it gets too hot. Linton thanked her as he got up and stretched his legs, saying she'd been very helpful, then turned to walk back to his car. It wasn't until he got into the driver's seat, slotted the gear into reverse and checked his hat in the rearview mirror that it really hit home how during the whole conversation, Elizabeth had not asked him the most obvious question. Why would anyone want to kill her brother? So those are my three pieces. Hope you enjoyed them. Okay, well, if this was a normal kind of a launch, I'd be saying, okay, let's all go across the road for a pint. Wouldn't that be wonderful? We can't do that. And so what I'm going to say is maybe one day we will all get together and go across the road for a pint, a positive, progressive, revolutionary pint to celebrate the changing of the world and a better place after this whole COVID experience. Maybe we'll all come out of this wiser and kinder and heading in the right direction together. And so before I start crying, I'm going to say thank you again to Emily and hand you back to Vinny to hopefully to plug the book. And thanks very much.
Well done, Pete.
Well, thank you, Pete. And we will hold you to that revolutionary drink, and hopefully we will have it in 2021. Hopefully not before too long. But in the meanwhile, we have the book, Jules and Rom, and it is for sale on our website. It costs €12, and on charliebyrne.ie you can purchase the book for that amount, and we can get it in the post to you, and you'll have it very quickly. And we're delighted. It is a big day when your book gets launched, so congratulations, Pete. And like I say, we were delighted to do it. And thank you, Emily, so much for such a wonderful introductory talk about the book. I think you're probably right. It is set 20 years in the future, but it might not be 20 years before we hear slogans like "people before robots." It has a contemporary ring to it almost. But and a very tantalizing snippet from the book from yourself in those 3 readings, Pete. So congratulations again. And Emily, thank you for a wonderful introductory talk about the book. And www.charliebyrne.ie for Jules and Jim. So thank you, and hopefully we will see people back in the shop before too long. But in the meanwhile, Jules and Jim is available on our website, charliebyrne.ie. So thank you once again, and thanks to Emily Cullen and to Pete Mullineaux, and congratulations to Pete.
Congratulations, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well
Thank you
done.
very much. Thank you, both of you. Okay.
Right, okay. That would be the time when there'd be normally a Bula boss. So congratulations to you.
We can say Slán Wale.
Indeed. So